Hello and welcome back, and that is right, we are revisiting the Firecuda 530. This time it's the 1TB model with the heatsink attached, and we're going ahead and testing for rather excellent games. We're going to be looking at, on the M.2 SSD, there's our Firecuda. The games we are looking at today are Spider-Man Remastered, that's the PS5 upscaled version of the PS4 mega hit. We're looking at Rocket League, we're looking at Last of Us Part 2, and we are looking at Ghosts of Tsushima, a game that I still can't pronounce right. So, without wasting any more of your time, let's go straight into this. Again, I strongly recommend that you've watched at least a couple of my previous videos before you've watched this, as it will explain a lot of the test process. It will also talk a lot more about the transfer of data, heat dissipation on this SSD, and more. We're not looking at how quickly it loads into the game, largely because these developer logos are not taxing that NVMe at all. These are artificial delays, and therefore we're not going to measure the SSD, both internal to PS5 or the M2, on how quickly it loads into the title screen. That's stupid, it makes no sense. What we're looking at is how quickly it loads into the world. So from here we're going to be loading in, comparing how quickly the Seagate Firecuda 530 1TB model loads into the world versus that of the internal PS5 SSD. And then inside the game we're going to look at frame rates, we're going to be looking at texture swaps as we move through the world, and just how quickly the game loads. So let's go in 3, 2, 1. And it should be lovely and fast, and we're already in. Again, we've got the full PS5 engine on this. This isn't the PS4 version, this is the full PS5 version. And what we're looking at here is 1, how quickly we can move through the world. 2, while we're moving through the world, that the graphics maintain their high quality all the way through. And again, there's a slight delay between my button pushes due to the capture. So again, if I do stick to a wall, that is why. We're looking at 1, that the game maintains that frame rate, and 2, as we make our way along, that as we run through the world, that the game still is able to swap out between those textures. So when you get far enough away from a building, the game, to save resources, will lower the textures being used in those building assets there in the distance. Same goes for people. So as we move along through the game and we go nice and high and then go back down to being very low, the game has to quickly swap out those textures as we go. So it's important to make sure the game is able to do that on this NVMe, as the GPU and CPU are pulling those assets from the NVMe in real time and moving them into more immediate cache. Again, we are using the full graphics mode at 30 frames per second, not the 60 frames. So again, where that concentrates more on the NVMe drawing all the assets for the game. By drawing, I mean pulling. It's the CPU and GPU doing any kind of drawing. If we went for the 60 frames mode, that would be more taxing for the CPU, GPU than it would for the memory. That's why we're not doing it. But for now, that's running fine for me. So why don't we do our second test in this game? We're going to go straight into a fast travel. And again, we're at the southernmost point of the map. So we're going to move along nice and high to a nice high zone of the map, whereupon we can fast travel and see how quickly it loads it in. Do bear in mind, a lot of these assets are still going to be reused and held in the cache, because it is still a city environment, but it still has to introduce a modicum of new assets and shape and framework. So let's go in 3, 2, 1. And we head in. It should be lovely and fast. We're on to the building. We're not going to give the game any time to relax. We're just going to move in nice and fast. Double check that the game's not going to do any like broken T poses or anything like that. We have seen the QLC SSDs do a little bit of that stuff, but for now, seemingly running fine. Again, still maintaining that nice bit of speed there, as I'd like to see. And ultimately, running just as quick as I'd like this game to be running right now on this kind of hardware. And the Firecuda there showing no limitations there in frame rate. Let's do one last big drop into forcing the game to introduce those assets. But seemingly running fine. Now, I know these videos can be repetitious if you've watched a lot of them, but bear in mind a lot of people are looking for a specific SSD. They're not going to watch the whole series, so I've got to cover all the bases, guys, and I apologise for any repetition in the delivery of when I'm talking about these SSDs. But for now, let's move on to our next game, which is Ghosts of Tsushima. Okay, so we're making our way in. Do bear in mind this is the PS5 version with all the Legends extra, and that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to move into Legends mode and load 2 different instances of this game. So we're going to go into the play mode. First one we're going to do is straight into the Severed Hearts story DLC there. And again, this is matchmaking turn off. This is fully offline experienced, and we're going to make our way in and load in 3, 2, 1. Again, we've got the countdown there. What we're looking at here is 1, the loading into the world. Do bear in mind that the load screen of this does use in-world assets. So again, you may see small differences during this loading screen between the internal PS5 SSD and what you see here on the Seagate there, whether it's different people standing there in the loading screen, different things being loaded in as the world is loaded in around us during this loading screen. And what we're going to look at here is frame rate, texture swap, and when we're just checking out the lighting there throughout the whole map. And I'm going to move lovely and quick. I'm just going to make my way into the central camp here. I'm not going to waste too much time knocking around. We're forcing the game to load in textures as quickly as it can. This is a closed kind of mission environment here. So ultimately what we're looking to do right now is see how quickly the game can stay on top of what we're doing, from the light effects across the ground to the shadow effects to the frame rate as we introduce enemies, the textures being swapped all the way along. We're just going to move as quick as we can as we carry on into this world. But for now, again, seeing no drop there. The enemies are going to start closing in on us soon. But for now, we can carry on. Again, lovely stuff there. Again, probably going to die at this rate if I don't move a little bit quicker there with us. But for now, I think that's running fine for me there. The lighting is running good. The textures around us are pretty sharp. And as we move in and out of close and far kind of assets there, it's still running pretty fine for us. But for now, arrow to the face. What we can do is start making our way back onto the select screen there and go to a survival mode. This one we're going to be focusing a lot more on that frame rate, more so than anything. So if we return to the lobby, again, we're staying offline here. So again, we're going to survival mode. This is Shores of Vengeance. Again, matchmaking turned off. We're going to load in. This time what we're looking at is the amount of AI being introduced and the amount of assets we're trying to draw in from the different enemies. Remember, a lot of this is stuff that's living in the world as we load in now versus the internal PS5 SSD. There's going to be the in-game assets being used during this loading, so do keep your eyes peeled there for any differences in texture or any assets that are in one loading screen and not the other. And remember, what we're doing now is we're going to run into the center of this map and introduce as many AIs to the surrounding environment as possible before we continue running around the map. That, of course, means that all of these AI are going to have close-up textures because we're in a close-knit environment with them, and particularly if there's any kind of glory kills and stuff like that. But for now, let's run straight into the world, go as quick as we can, and again, loading in as many enemies as possible throughout this map as we jump through. Again, taking a slightly different route than we did on the internal PS5 SSD because we want as many enemies as possible to be tailing us. And again, keep rolling, keep moving nice and quick in the hope that we don't get ourselves killed, because there's a lot of enemies here to be content with. So again, we'll make sure we get a nice health boost there. But again, what we're doing is trying to drawing as many of these enemies as possible. So carry on, and again, we're going to be having a lot of AI here. Again, the actual act of having the AI there is going to be more taxing for the CPU more than any other component, but it's still a lot of assets that we're forcing the game to have to bring in as quickly as possible, particularly given the distinctive differences between a number of the enemies and their outfits, and particularly the facial animations as well that we've noticed previously. So again, we've loaded in plenty there. Still no drops in what I'm seeing there. It's still running quite well as far as I can see it. So why don't we start making our way around the map in the hope that the bowsman there isn't going to make our life difficult as we make our way around the map. And all these enemies are still going to be tailing us here And we're just double checking that the game's not going to be struggling while we're really pushing this level nice and hard in terms of all of those assets being required, both in terms of the picture quality of them and just how much we're taxing the system so that the CPU, GPU can't pick up any slack there. But from what I'm seeing, it's running absolutely fine there. Let's grab ourselves kind of health item there. And we'll carry on as we move along. And I think that's enough for this game. We'll start making our way into our second to last game, which is, of course, Rocket League. Now, the test for Rocket League is actually surprisingly small. The only reason we include Rocket League in this testing is twofold. One, it's because it is a game that still has a tremendous online following, and there's a good number of people that are going to utilise this SSD in their PS5s that are going to play this game, so they're going to be curious how well it plays on there. But on top of that, there's going to be the question in Rocket League of that frame rate. This is a game that lives and dies by its frame rate. The graphics, because it is a game that has been around for a long time, aren't necessarily the most demanding, but they have been upgraded significantly throughout the game's life cycle. So what we're doing is an exhibition mode. So it's going to be an offline exhibition mode in soccer in the Octagon 4v4 on beginner. And what we're looking at here is that frame rate. I'm just going to, dick around on the game for a little bit, but mainly what we're looking at here is ensuring that the frame rate is smooth as custard and not that there's any kind of drop in the assets and the effects. So let's make our way into the game now. We're just going to go straight into it in 3, 2, 1. And what we're seeing here is how quickly it goes into the map. There'll be a slight pop-up there for the people on game, but they're nice and simple. We're going in. Let's go straight in and just trying to tax it there as quickly as we can. Again, not one of the most demanding games on our list, but still a very popular one. I know a number of gamers, and it's still in pro gamer leagues as well, this game. It clearly has that much of a following. But for now, if we move around the arena a little bit here, rather than focusing on that ball there, what we can do is have a little look and see how well this game seemingly runs around us. If we kind of take our eye off and make sure the game's not doing any hidden loading there in the background. But again, still running absolutely fine now. I'm seeing no problems. Again, still shiny, still that tremendous frame rate that this game maintains. Again, I know it's not the most intense game that we could be utilising for our testing, but it's still a popular one nonetheless. But let's make our way into our last game test, which is going to be The Last of Us Part 2. Dare I say it, a little bit more demanding. Okay, so here we are on the title screen of The Last of Us Part 2, and what we're looking at here is two different areas in the first part of the game, in day one. So we're looking at Seattle day one, and we are loading into the tunnels, and then the next test will be in channel 13. Now, we're going to go through during the loading screens, which, by the way, are extraordinarily long, regardless of whether you use a PS4, the internal PS5 SSD, or this Seagate. But let's go in right now into the tunnels area. We're going to go for the moderate difficulty. We're going to start in 3, 2, 1, go. So again, as mentioned, The Last of Us Part 2 came right there in one of the last games for the PS4 before the PS5 came out. It is a tremendously demanding game. The reason we're using these two particular load areas is because even though both games from a cold title screen load have a huge amount of sequential load data at the beginning, the game takes advantage of a huge array of different loading techniques of in-world loading to hide a lot of it. That's everything from silent loading, from slowing the character down in crevices or walking cinematic segments, to the game having restricted cameras which then hide a lot of the angles and hide a lot of the graphics being swapped out in both textures and assets themselves. So what we're looking at here in the first area in the tunnels is the game has 3 single silent loading segments and a lot of texture swap all the way along. And what we're looking at here is how quickly the Firecuda loads this area compared with the internal PS5 SSD, and how quickly the game introduces those assets. So sometimes the slow moving segment will actually prevent you moving forward unless the game is ready to perform that swap out. As you can see from the loading so far, the sequential data is loaded, and now we're moving into lots of tiny stuff. This is more inclined with your IOPS kind of measurements here on the importance of your SSD. Again, this is not the fastest game to load on the PS5, but as we make our way in immediately, we can start making our way forward and going straight in to try and tax this SSD into allowing us to move forward as quickly as possible. So again, we're moving in, lovely and sharp. And again, what we're doing here is we're persevering through the slow loading sections of when the game is going to force us to move slow, and then bar entrance into a previous area. So again, we're moving in, no delays whatsoever. We just want to move straight forward into that next segment. And again, moving straight in. I think it's triangle. And there you go, another slow moving loadout segment. A large part of this is because this area of the game can't really hide a lot of the texture swaps. There's no chance for it to swap those out as we move along this area. So there's lots of forced loading again, like this one, that stop you from moving too fast for the game to not be able to destroy previous assets, removing them from the cache and introducing these new ones, as you can see here on screen. But once again, I'm going to move nice and quickly forward as we make our way through the map, and we're going to end this segment as soon as we can get into the train cart there at the back. So hopefully we can stay alive long enough for that. We're not going to concentrate too much on fighting anything. We just want to keep moving forward and forcing the game to load those assets as quickly as possible as we make our way along. And again, as we keep persevering forward, we're going to see an enemy here as we move in nice and close. And again, we can go ahead and kill them. They're going to make a noise, so we're going to have a clicker running towards us shortly. So what we want to do here is start making our way into the next segment before a clicker kills us. Chances are it's going to get us anyway. And then what we want to do is keep doing this until we're assisted. So again, another silent loading segment here as we persevere forward. And then what we're going to see it load into the new section here and see that it accurately moves into that new segment quickly. As you can see, here we are, we're in. It's destroyed a lot of those previous assets, and it's running as quickly as I'd like to see it. So there you go. That has been lovely and quick from that first segment in The Last of Us 2. Let's move on to our second test there on the channel 13. Let's come out there, exit to the main menu, and from there, channel 13 is slightly different. It's a more open area. So consequently with channel 13, it prevents the game, going into chapters, it prevents the game from having some of those forced walk-in segments. So it has to load in a lot more data. So I'll show you here. Let's load in. Let's get that. We're going to continue with that. We're going to go in. Let's go ahead, channel 13. Start in moderate and go in 3, 2, 1. Oh, it's going to do it again. Let's try it again. 3, 2, 1. Once again, we've got that cold boot from this area here where it's going to be going from the title screen. Again, if you were playing this game organically, making your way through it after a few hours of play, most of the loading you're seeing here is hidden behind cutscene, hidden behind those silent loading segments. So a lot of players only ever see this extensive and frankly one of the dullest loading screens in gaming when they load from the title screen, because most people use suspension on their consoles now, so they can turn the console into hibernation and resume play immediately. A lot of players will only probably a handful, 2 to 3 times, ever see this loading screen. So this segment should load a little faster than the previous segment we looked at there. Again, it's knocked out the sequential data lovely and quick. So as soon as we get into the world, we're going to want to move forward very fast to make sure that we don't give the PS5 time to breathe as we run through these segments. And as soon as we get in, the idea is to make our way through the channel 13 area, but push forward through each of them. So again, there's about 3 silent load segments in this area, but because it's a much broader area, it has a lot of controlled camera. So, but what by that I mean is there's areas where you cannot move the camera because the game doesn't want you to look at certain assets being swapped out, either for low textures or are being swapped out for entirely new textures, entirely and removed to free up cache space for the soon to come area. So let's push forward, lovely and fast. Let's carry on there. Now that felt a bit average, that load. Again, I'm not going to say that was particularly breathtaking. I've seen better from this SSD, but again, this is one of those games where there's a lot of variables. Again, if we move forward, again, we're not going to waste any time. We just want to carry on forward. This is another area where the camera is restricted. We can't move it very far out. We can take it to about there. That is our lot. So once again, we carry on as always. Pop 2 in the TV for no reason whatsoever. A therapist will probably tell me more about that. Again, moving for the map as quickly as we can, because what we want to do is just make sure that the game's not being given too much of a breather. Another silent loading segment here as we make our way into this area. So it's forced walk. It's now destroying a lot of those assets behind us. And what we want to do is still not give the time to breathe, because if we take a couple of tiny shortcuts here, we can immediately make our way back to see the area we were in earlier and force the game to not allow those assets to be low textured too quickly. So again, as we move along straight away into this area here that overlooks where we were earlier, and from there we can immediately start making our way along. So there's the area we were in earlier, but obviously these have now been swapped out for lower resolution textures, and we're going to quickly power forward as soon as possible and again make our way in to the next area as quick as we can. Get those lights up there. And again, game's running as fast as I'd like it to see. Make our way into the office, and that's really it. Now we're onto that area there, and I think we can largely call it a day there. And that's it, really. This has been testing Last of Us Part 2 on this SSD, the Seagate Firecuda 1TB. No real drop there. I think the loading now is a little slower than I would have liked, but I'll double check there in the edit. So let's come out of this game now and make our way back onto the XMB and start moving these games back and summarize everything we've seen today. So as I move these games back, what have we learned? Well, once again, I'm always going to be a fan of this SSD. There's a few games where I'm always kind of confused how much the movement, let's move those games over. So let's have a look. There is our data. You can see there's been a massive update there for one of those games during the course of our gaming there in between the sessions. But if we move that data over, the heatsink on this SSD is still absolutely great. There's been no raise in fan. The only noise we've ever heard from this system is disks when we're using those to authenticate our games. Don't worry, all the data's on the PS5. Still one of the more expensive SSDs, the Firecuda, but in its defense, it has to be said, you are getting the most durable and the fastest drive out there. Also, during our internal PS5 benchmarks, we were able to see in our previous video that the SSD comfortably hit 6,500 megs straight from the PS5 bench, which is always good to see. And of course, final judgment for this SSD will always be reserved for the big face-offs, where we compare it in our third generation face-off against the Samsung 980 Pro, the WD Black SN850, the likes of the Brent Rocket 4 Plus, and of course the myriad of SSDs that have been released in the last 6 months. So do stay tuned for those. If you found this video helpful or enjoyed it, click like. It genuinely helps the channel develop and makes each video better than the last. If you want to learn more, click subscribe or the bell to be notified as we test this SSD and others, as well as producing lots of guides on PS5 SSD storage as the year rolls on. And of course, use the links in the description. There's one to get free advice over on NAS Compares to help you choose the right SSD for your system, and a link and a breakdown to the best SSDs and heatsinks and guides for PS5 storage. I will see you next time.